I always arrived before the lights decided to be brave. At 6:35 a.m., the trading floor was a dim aquarium of black screens and the soft click of the cleaning crew's cart. The city was still rinsing itself from the night. Rain sheeting down the windows, taxi lights combing Broadway, coffee steam rising like a benediction from the cart on the corner. I'd step off the elevator into the quiet and breathe the place in. The faint bite of toner, the metallic tingle of new staplers, the ghost of cologne that lived in the hallway after senior partners passed. Finance smells expensive even when no one is there to buy it. I'd set my paper cup on the edge of my tidy desk, the one that everyone used as a landmark. "Leave it with the assistant," they'd say, as if I were furniture, and I would begin the small rituals that made the day survivable. Unjamming the printer. Aligning agendas so the left margins sang. Forecast spreadsheets like neat little cities. The red light on my phone blinking at me with early voicemails from London, someone's impatience encoded as data. The rain would tap the glass and I'd tap the keys, and we'd make a kind of truce. The weather and I, together but separate. When people started to arrive, they didn't always see me. My name was on my badge, on my HR file, in small black letters beside my cubicle plant, but the office seemed to blur it to a generic noun. Assistant. As if that was both my title and my entire personality. I learned to be a presence that took care of things before anyone needed to ask. It earned me thank yous like spare change, tossed over a shoulder. I kept the coins and forgot the hands that dropped them. I'm not bitter, I tell myself, just tired. The morning this story began, I was more than tired. I was holding a letter I had written in the midnight hush of my studio apartment, after another weekend spent on call while my friends went apple picking upstate. It was not a dramatic letter. It was small and correct, as if it wore a blazer. 2 paragraphs that said thank you and goodbye, with the measured cadence of someone who knows grammar is a kind of mercy. I folded it into thirds and slid it into an envelope with my name in the corner, the only flourish. The paper was warmer than my fingers. I slipped the letter under the top copy of the executive packets, the ones I collated for the week's leadership meeting. The CEO's packet sat on the left, where his assistant used to place things before she left for maternity leave. They hadn't replaced her. Someone said he preferred doing it himself, that he didn't need anyone. I believed that the way I believed finance believed in numbers, as a story that was almost true. By 9 o'clock, the floor was awake. Voices like static, elevator doors opening and closing like a heartbeat, the skyline sharpening under a slowly clearing sky. I took the stacked packets to the boardroom. The glass walls were still fogged from the night, and their condensation carried our names back at us when we walked by. Reversed, private, a secret language. I arranged 12 copies, each with tabs and a highlighter. I kept my head down and my pace steady. There's a choreography to invisibility. Step lightly. Move in straight lines. Anticipate collisions before they happen. When I turned to go, someone was already there. He was taller than the stories. I didn't usually think about how men carried their height, but with him it was the first thing I noticed. He wore it with precision, like a suit that had been cut to the exact measure of his patience. His hair held the kind of wave that seems like an accident, but isn't. His jawline was a slow decision. The only untidy thing was the edge of his tie, loosened just enough to say the morning had begun in a hurry. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the table, eyes scanning the packet closest to him with a focus that moved like a blade. "Morning," he said. In that way executives say it to the room or the air, or the person likely to answer. I told him good morning. My voice did that small lift it does when you're not sure if you've been hurt all your life and suddenly you might be. He flipped the cover page. My resignation letter was not in his copy. It was beneath the top copy that belonged to the chief operating officer. In the second it took me to see that, to feel the quiet relief wash me clean, he moved the CEO packet aside and reached for the next one in the stack, this thing he did when he wanted to compare printing density. He liked to check that no one's copy had bled numbers in different shades. I had learned this from a comment threaded through a comment, the way you learn the steps of a dance a floor above you. He lifted the COO packet. My letter shifted. He saw the corner of the envelope, that snow-white angle, and slid it free with the precise economy of someone retrieving a scalpel. "That's not part of the deck," I said, heart thudding with a ridiculous, useless honesty. He glanced at my name in the corner. "It is now." He tapped the envelope against his palm as if it were just a piece of paper, which, of course, it was. But everything changes its weight according to who is holding it. He didn't open it, not yet. He simply looked at me for the first time like a person, like one unique fact in a sheet of aggregated data. And I felt the strange physics of being seen. "I can take that." I offered, my hand already extending, the polite rescue of a woman used to smoothing wrinkles others never see. "Can you?" he asked, not unkind, but in a way that suggested the question was larger than the moment. His gaze returned to the envelope. "Come back after this." He slid it beneath his packet, as if sheltering it. As if saying, "Not yet." He left me standing beneath the hum of the recessed lights, one shoulder colder than the other. The meeting lasted exactly 57 minutes, because he hated round numbers for anything that could be accomplished sooner. I knew this from a town hall where he spoke about efficiency the way other men talk about first loves. When the doors opened, partners came out in 2s and 3s. Laughter poured into the hallway like champagne, and the COO clapped me on the shoulder without looking, as if I were a lucky column. I kept my face a soft, agreeable shape. He was last. He always was. He stayed to align stray water bottles and close laptop lids in a nameless habit that felt like reverence. He stepped into the hall and gestured toward the smaller conference room facing the river. "In here." The smaller room held the kind of silence that seems to have thoughts. The glass caught the slope of the clouds, the scrape of a gull far below. He put the envelope on the table between us and sat. He didn't offer me a chair, so I didn't sit. When a person like him doesn't say you may, you wait to be invited. Some of us have been learning these rules since our first waitressing shift. "What are you resigning from?" he asked. The envelope was intact. "From being the person everyone forgets they rely on." His mouth did something almost like a smile. "That's not an answer. That's a sentence you practiced." "I practice everything worth saying," I admitted. "Otherwise people hear what they want to hear." "What do you want me to hear?" His voice was lower, closer to human than baritone. "That I have been here 3 years. That I have trained 2 analysts who now speak over me in meetings. That my mother's favorite question is, 'When will you sleep like a person again?' That my landlord raised the rent. That I used to like numbers before they started feeling like chaperones. And that I kept thinking work would notice I was good before I noticed I was gone." I finally sat. That's a long way to say, "I'm tired, and I'm leaving before tired turns me unkind." He breathed out through his nose. He looked at the letter again, as if the paper might sprout a different truth if he stared long enough. "And you decided to announce it like a magician's reveal under a budget packet. It seemed efficient." He nodded as if I'd spoken in his dialect. "What's your name?" he asked, softer. I told him. His mouth formed the syllables as if they were a foreign currency, and he was testing the weight. "I should have known that sooner," he said, so quietly I nearly missed it. Then he stood. "Don't give this to HR yet. Give me a week. Work as you have been, but differently." Differently? "I'll need your attention on something specific. A project audit." He paused, and the river glimmered behind him like a broken mirror mending itself. "It might explain some of your tired." I wanted to tell him I had nothing left to give to a company that learned my name by accident. Instead, I told him the truth that surprised me by existing. "I'm listening." The audit was a maze I had been walking with my eyes closed. A set of discrepancies in expense reports connected to a client merger that had looked, from the outside, like a clean handshake. He asked for my help not because I was an assistant who excelled at color coding, but because I knew how to move around people. I knew who smiled when they lied and who wrote in all caps when they were afraid. More importantly, I knew where to look for the things no one put on paper. He gave me a temporary share in a folder called Reconciliation. The name tasted like something that could be holy. We met at strange hours, in short, necessary bursts that didn't show up on anyone's calendar. In the elevator at 8:13 a.m., we avoided each other's eyes as if they were direct lines to alarms. In the copy room at 7:05 p.m., we stood with the door half open, the hum of the machine disguising our sentences, names, dates, a receipt from a steakhouse the night a client said there was no dinner. In these pockets of privacy, I noticed details I'd never had time to inventory. The accidental brush of his sleeve against the jamb as he passed through a door. The way his cologne softened at the end of the day, something cedar and restraint. The faint rasp that entered his voice when he'd gone too long without water. He was not the rumor of ruthlessness that swirled on the trading floor. He was something rarer. A man who respected time as if it were a living thing. We were followed by whispers, of course. Offices circulate oxygen and speculation in equal measure. Someone said I'd been seen in the corner office after hours. Someone said he'd asked for my input on a new data tool. And laughter followed as if the joke were the shape of me. There was a moment in a team huddle when an analyst made a soft, ugly sound after my suggestion, and the room ricocheted its amusement against the glass. I felt my spine go cold. He was there. He was not supposed to intervene. He didn't. But he looked up and let a silence fall around us like a perfectly folded napkin. The laugh died of suffocation. Later in the corridor, he passed me without a word, but his hand brushed the space between my shoulder blades, as one might steady a person on a moving train. Barely there, deliberate gone. The heat lasted longer than his touch. By the fourth day, the audit had teeth. A discrepancy in travel reimbursements that looped back to a senior manager who never returned receipts. A pattern of miscellaneous entries that held together like a code, and a stream of charitable donations that had been split so finely across entities that the total went fuzzy at the edges. None of it was large enough to scream. Together, it whispered. We worked late that Friday. The office, emptied of its noise, felt like a museum of our industry. Awards in glass, chairs pushed in with geometric obedience, the city's winter dusk pressing its face to the windows as if it wanted to be let in. I arranged printouts along the conference table like a long, complicated song. He stood at the far end, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, forearms marked by the faintest map of veins, gazing not at me, but at the story the numbers insisted on telling. Someone's funding their courage, he said finally. And losing the difference in translation. I ran my fingertip along a column total that pretended it didn't know how to add correctly. This is where it starts pretending. He came to stand beside me. He didn't crowd. But proximity is its own kind of language. The window threw our reflections into the room. A woman and a man, almost touching, almost not. His warmth reached me like a rumor that turned out to be true. He spoke in a lower tone, as if we might wake the building. We decided who needed to be asked, and how. We drew a map of the questions that would edge our discovery into a confession. We made a plan to keep the audit quiet through Monday, to let it breathe only in rooms with closed doors and no glass. When I reached for the last sheaf of receipts, our fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. The static snapped so softly I thought I imagined it. I kept my hand steady because that was how I'd learned to live. He didn't move away. The pause breathed between our skin, a delicate animal. We stood like people who knew that one wrong gesture would turn the world inside out. I could hear his breath. He could hear mine. The city hummed an indifferent jazz below us. "We should go," I said, and even the smallest words felt heavy. He cleared his throat. "We should." But neither of us did for one full, consequential heartbeat. Monday arrived like a test you forgot you'd signed up for. We had 2 meetings scheduled. One with the senior manager whose receipts disguised their elegance, and one with the COO who had likely approved them with a distracted signature. I dressed like I imagined bravery might look on a weekday. A navy skirt that didn't ask for opinions and a silk blouse in a gray that caught light like a secret. In the mirror, I recognized the version of myself who keeps promises no one witnesses. At 8:02, I slid a packet under his door, because sending an email felt like an invitation to be forwarded. At 8:11, my computer blinked with a calendar request from HR that I had not asked for. At 8:20, the senior manager arrived with an apology already half-formed on his mouth, a performance practice to fit any crime. At 8:29, a rumor flared like static through the chat we all pretended not to monitor. HR flagged irregularities. Names redacted. Audit. My resignation letter, still nested under a packet on the corner of his desk, felt suddenly like an artifact from a museum about another woman's life. The first meeting did not go badly. It did not go well. He asked precise questions that didn't sound like accusations until they did. The senior manager spoke in circling phrases. Rounding errors, the team processed. I wasn't aware. The company's favorite shrug. When the numbers narrowed, his voice slipped. He reached for water he didn't drink. He started to sweat in thumbnails around his hairline. It was small and human and almost distracting. He eventually asked for a lawyer, which only people who are guilty or tired do. We ended the conversation and let him leave with all the dignity the hallway could spare. The second meeting was worse. Not because the COO was complicit. I don't think he was. But because complicity has so many cousins you can't tell who was invited and who just heard the music. He was angry, of course, offended by the implication that oversight could sleep on his watch. He said the right things about protecting the firm, and then he said one wrong thing about protecting reputations. The CEO's jaw tightened. I felt the meeting tilt toward a different kind of conversation than any of us wanted to have in October. HR set a formal review in motion. Policies unfurled like heavy drapes. People lowered their voices to hear the sound of their own innocence more clearly. Through it all, I kept the audit moving like a sharp river beneath a frozen one. He kept his schedule improbably open, which meant he was canceling meetings that mattered in a way I didn't want to think about. At night, alone in my apartment, I watched rain move like static across the streetlight and wondered when my letter would become real. It became real sooner than I wanted. On Wednesday at noon, my manager, the one with the habit of congratulating himself when I finished something, stopped by my desk holding an HR envelope as if it might burn. "Heard you're moving on," he said, in the tone people reserve for neighbors they never learn to like. "End of the week, I'm told. Transition notes." He smiled lightly, already away. I stared at the envelope as if it had been addressed to the wrong person in the right life. He had kept his promise to buy me a week. But a week is not a lifetime. I had wanted an echo. I had wanted more than a grace period from a man who looked at my letter like a map. I went to the balcony at the end of the hall, the one that looks down over the pocket park where office workers pretend to be citizens. The October wind bit the rim of my coffee. The river was grayer than usual, the city a shade darker, as if someone had turned down the warmth. I put my hands on the rail and tried to imagine the next thing. A different job. A different building. Another variation of the same fluorescent vow. I told myself the truth. I didn't want to leave because I was small. I wanted to leave because I had outgrown being unseen. Behind me, the door opened. He didn't step out. He let the cooler air fold into the hallway and waited a beat. Privacy is sometimes given by the absence of movement. "I asked for more time," he said. "They gave me policy." I didn't turn. Policies keep the building standing. I paused. So do the people no one invites to the ribbon cutting. He stepped beside me then, elbows on the rail, close enough that I could feel the heat of his sleeve against the cool of my forearm. We stood like colleagues who could pretend to be strangers if necessary. The river moved like a sentence that refused to end. "I read it," he said finally. "The letter?" "Yes." He adjusted his cuff as if it were the only thing he'd ever touched on purpose. "You wrote it like a person who knows how to leave quietly." It bothered me. "Why?" "Because quiet departures don't fix loud problems. And because I had not noticed you were drowning while carrying the office on your back." He exhaled. "That's my failure, not yours." The wind borrowed the scent of his cologne and softened it into something human. "Failures can be corrected," I said, surprising myself with the kindness of it. "Some, not all." He turned finally and the city slid away. There was only his face, bare of its public armor. "Do you want to be here?" No one had asked me that since my interview 3 years ago, when I thought ambition was a staircase and not a treadmill. "I want to be where what I do matters." He nodded. "Then I want you to stay." The sentence landed between us without flourish or plea. Not as an assistant everyone disregards. As the person who is going to build a compliance function that can't be gamed by anyone with a charming expense account. "I want you to architect it, to pick the software, to hire 2 people who answer to you and whose names you will never allow yourself to forget. I'll protect the budget. You'll protect the integrity. If that's not what you want, I won't make a speech." He offered a small smile that wasn't for public notice. "I'll just regret it." My heart beat so loudly I was embarrassed for it. "Is this a job offer?" "It's a correction. And a job offer." The door swung half-closed behind him, not quite latched, our insurance against the future. I lifted the cartridge, and a streak of inky black crossed my wrist, a perfect bruise-colored band. He reached for a paper towel and then didn't hand it to me. He waited. I offered my arm, wrist up, the paint of it ridiculous and intimate. He wiped it away with a care that startled me, each soft circle an apology he wasn't making with words. I watched the black smear blossom on the white square in his hand, and the room shrank to the size of a heartbeat. He placed the towel in the bin as if it were evidence. We stepped away at the same time. The door opened fully. The storm remembered its job and crashed against the glass. We did not speak of it. Another day, a conference in Boston where the hotel air smelled like ambition and carpet cleaner. We sat 2 seats apart in a panel on risk models, taking notes we already knew we would never read again. A fire alarm hiccuped to life at noon, and everyone stood in a polite panic. In the stairwell, bodies pressed into a civil arrangement. I felt the old fear of being small in a crowd, of being rearranged by forces that never learned my name. He was behind me, a steady presence who didn't touch me, and yet somehow kept me upright, 6 inches of space that felt like a promise. At the bottom of the stairs, in the spill of bodies and thin alarm sound, the smell of outside coming in, we caught each other's eyes. And something passed between us that was not a plan or a policy. It was simply recognition. We nodded like people agreeing to a story neither wanted to rush. This might have gone on forever, our responsible orbit, our careful grammar, if not for the end-of-year gala, where the wine was better than our usual, and the band played jazz from somewhere so distant it seemed to slip under the doors. I wore a dress my friend called evidence, dove gray silk that moved when I remembered to stand still. The room was a blizzard of satin and black tuxedo lines, voices pitched just a note below bragging. He stood near the dais, a constellation of board members arranged casually around him like they'd been posed by a patient photographer. He saw me and did not look away immediately. It was enough. Later, after speeches about growth that used graphs like metaphors, after applause that belonged to the lights as much as the words, I stepped out to the balcony to breathe something that wasn't air-conditioned. The city was a jeweled horizon. The night pressed close but not unkindly. I heard his steps before I saw him. He came to stand beside me in the way he always did, the way that suggests both respect and an iron stake hammered into the ground to keep him from leaning nearer. "Nice speech," I said. It had been. He had a way of saying the true thing as if it were both obvious and new. "You wrote the part about integrity," he said. "It sounded better coming from you. I prefer windows to microphones." He glanced down at my hand as if he were checking whether I held something breakable. "You like the dress," he observed, as if it were a fact he'd been asked to confirm. "I do," I said. "It makes me feel like I fit my life." He was quiet, and the quiet was a cat between us, purring and pretending it wasn't waiting to be invited onto the couch. "I've been thinking," he said finally, and the words were the kind that rearrange rooms, "about how long we can be correct before we become cowards." The jazz slipped under the door like a permission slip. I turned to him fully. I knew what he meant. The knowledge had been living under my ribs for months, a small, stubborn bird. "And your conclusion?" "That honesty isn't always scandal. Sometimes it's just breathing." He looked out at the skyline and found the point where the river pretended to become the ocean. "I'm not naive. We can't be impulsive. We can't be foolish. But we also can't keep acting like waiting is the same as wisdom." I felt the night on my shoulders like someone else's jacket. "What do you want?" I asked. There was no coyness in it. There never had been with us. He swallowed. When he spoke, the restraint sheared off the edges of his voice. "I want to take you to dinner tomorrow and not hide the reservation name. I want to walk you to a cab and not keep my hands in my pockets. I want to tell HR in advance not because it's their business, but because we won't let anyone else make it theirs for us. I want to build something where the rules are a structure, not a cage." His breath shook very slightly. "And if you don't want that, I want to keep working with you with the exact same respect and try not to regret what we were responsible enough to refuse." The world tilted into focus. It was summer sharp in October. I took in his face as if this were the last moment before the page turned. I thought of the morning lights, the espresso steam, the way office rumors travel on the same air as praise. I thought of my letter and how it had been a small quiet that led to this larger one. I thought of the way he had wiped toner from my wrist as if it had been a vow. "The night is beautiful," I said, voice steady, "and we both have good shoes. Let's walk somewhere anonymous and decide what to tell the world tomorrow." He laughed, a real sound that felt like it had been waiting for months. He didn't touch me. Not yet. We left together, weaving through tables like two people who had learned how not to collide. In the lobby, he pressed the elevator button with an absurd gentleness. In the mirrored box, we stood a careful foot apart, and the space was a live wire humming with everything we were not yet doing. On the street, the city received us without curiosity. We walked, our shoulders almost brushing, warmth traveling between us like a current. In the shelter of a block where no one knew our names, he reached for my hand with a question written on his face. I nodded and our fingers interlaced as if they'd been practicing in pockets for years. We talked about the department, the gala, the way winter would hang its fog over the river soon. We talked about policies and precedents, about what it would mean to be open without being foolish. When we reached the quiet of a small park, he stopped, and the lamplight caught the planes of his face in a way that made him look both younger and more serious. He brushed a strand of hair back from my cheek with the back of his fingers, the gentlest touch, the kind designed to be denied if required. I closed my eyes for a breath, a trust so small most people would miss it. When I opened them, he was closer. Not enough to be a story for anyone else. Enough to be one for us. We didn't kiss, not there, not then. He lifted my hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to the place where pulse meets bone, a gesture that felt more intimate than anything we might have done in a shadowed doorway. It was a promise without schedule, a blueprint without the walls. "The night is fading," he said softly. "It will be back," I answered. He walked me to a cab. He waited until the door closed. He didn't look away until the car began to move. In the rearview mirror, his figure receded in the kind of straight-backed patience I had come to recognize as his truest self. I pressed my palm to my mouth where the warmth still lingered and let the city move me forward. Weeks later, the office lights dimmed one by one around 6 o'clock on a Tuesday, the hour when everyone performs leaving while secretly staying. HR had our statement in a file with 3 copies locked somewhere I never thought about. It said we were dating. It said we had disclosed. It said we would recuse ourselves where necessary and decline each other's meeting invitations when it would look like favoritism to attend. It said the things it needed to say so the building would not collapse from a tremor. In practice, it looked like this. I ran my department with my name on the door and no apology inside. He ran the company with the same steadiness he always had, except now he occasionally checked the weather before suggesting we move a meeting for morale. We still used the elevator like a corridor across a citadel. We also sometimes used it like a place where I could lean very subtly into his side for one breath between floors, the kind of contact that doesn't show up on cameras because it lives entirely in the realm of intention. We were careful, and we were not afraid. The difference felt like air. In the evenings, when the skyline's brightness retreated and the river began its dark version of the day, he would sometimes stand in the doorway of my office, knuckles touching the wood, eyes asking a question the world had finally learned did not belong to them. Sometimes I was too tired. Sometimes he was. Often we went out for an hour anyway, to the small place down the block where the owner pretended not to notice us, and the jazz hovered just above the level of the conversation, like the kindness of an old friend. We spoke about the market and about books and about the way people are always trying to buy certainty when they mean comfort. We argued about whether policies could teach integrity. We told each other the parts of our histories that had made us careful. There were evenings when the city felt like a third participant, warm, amused, indulgent of our restraint. And there were nights we chose to say goodnight at the curb, his hand at the small of my back for the length of a single sentence, my breath catching in the space between words. The intimacy of waiting is not something you can explain to people who think love is only a door you walk through. Sometimes it is the hall outside the door, where you learn to listen to each other's footsteps. I kept my resignation letter. I didn't frame it. I didn't throw it away. It lived in the top drawer of my desk at home, a white slip of paper that disclosed what I might have become if the moment had passed differently. It reminded me that leaving can be a kind of courage, and staying can be too. It reminded me that being seen is not a fairy tale. It is a practice. On nights when the city lay quiet enough to hear my own pulse, I would take the letter out and touch the place where my name hung in the corner, and I would send gratitude backward to the tired woman who had written it. She had given me the last thing she had left, an honest exit. That exit had turned into an entrance. If there is a moral, it is small and undramatic, the way most truths are. Sometimes the thing you fold between the pages of other people's lives, your letter, your hope, your quiet refusal to disappear, is found by the person who will not let it be filed away. Sometimes the person who never needed anyone realizes what they actually needed was the one they did not think to notice in time. If you are lucky, the rain outside the office window will be exactly the right kind of persistent, the espresso steam will rise like a blessing, and the elevator will hum its unremarkable song as you step into another day you chose on purpose. A few months after the audit, on a morning with a clean sky and a forecast that promised nothing dramatic, I arrived to find a potted olive tree standing in the corner of my office, near the west-facing window. There was no note. There was no need. I touched one small silver-green leaf with a finger and felt the quiet in my chest bloom to match it. Down the hall, a door closed softly. Somewhere in the building, jazz seeped through the seams, the volume set by someone who understood discretion. I opened my laptop and wrote an email to my team about the new policy draft. I kicked him because he wanted to see the draft, not because I needed him to. Then I looked out at the city and saw, faintly reflected in the glass, the shape of my life. Its lines steady, its shadows softened by a presence that had learned to stand beside mine. The office lights dimmed one by one that night, and I stayed to finish a sentence that deserved not to be rushed. When I finally turned off the lamp, the window held two shadows, not fused but touching at the edges. We didn't need to say anything. The door clicked behind us with the simplicity of a promise kept. And the city, in its patient way, kept breathing.